Welcome to my presentation about Regina Anderson Andrews. Ethelene Whitmire's book, Regina Anderson Andrews, Harlem Renaissance Librarian, presents its subject as a resolute pioneer who resisted and overcame racial tensions. In the introduction, Whitmire writes that Andrews lived through World Wars I and II, the Chicago race riots, the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, and both the 1935 and 1964 Harlem riots, among other events. Let us look at her remarkable life, starting with her childhood and background. Regina Anderson Andrews was born on May 21, 1901. Her mother was a china painter, and her father was accomplished, beginning as a stenographer and eventually becoming a lawyer. Her parents were successful, which undoubtedly gave her advantages which would help to steer the course of her life and career. Whitmire points out that growing up, Regina would come to view herself in non-racialized terms. She enjoyed a happy childhood, and her parents instilled in her firm values and a strong sense of self-worth. After their divorce, her parents sent Regina to live with her grandfather in a place called Normal in Illinois. After returning to Chicago and finishing her schooling, Regina attended the College of Liberal Arts in Wilberforce. It was during this time that Regina began to work at the college library. The school was strict, and she eventually left. Although the reasons for this are unknown, family trouble may have driven her to leave school and travel back to Chicago, where she eventually applied to work at the Chicago Public Library. Why is this backstory important? Well, Regina's upbringing and unique characteristics led her to the steps of the Chicago Public Library. In order to obtain a job, she had to complete the civil service exam, which did not ask for the applicant's race. Based solely on her merits and not her skin color, Regina was offered the job. Throughout her life, she would slowly move up the ranks in libraries, and would sometimes be met with resistance along the way. Her transfers to various libraries allowed her to leave her mark on many institutions, and it appears that each of these libraries benefited. Gina was asked by the interviewer at the New York Public Library what her race was. As Whitmire recalls, when Regina was asked, "What do you mean, where you have here under race and religion, you have American?" Regina answered, "Well, I always considered myself an American. I do not know what else I could be." His eventual response was, "To us, you're not an American, you're not white." She was given a position at the 135th Street branch, a library whose patrons were mostly African American. This was a stark contrast to the library environment that she was accustomed to working in. It was during this period that Regina found herself in the middle of the Harlem Renaissance. Regina first became involved with the North Harlem Community Forum in the 1920s. Whitmire describes the forum's aim was educating its audiences on a wide variety of literary topics and brought Regina into the important hub of intellectual life in New York City. She met recognizable and famous individuals during this time: Langston Hughes, Arna Bontemps, Zora Neale Hurston, and W.E.B. Du Bois, to name a few. She lived with two other women during this time, Ethel Ray Nance and Luella Tucker, in the now famous 580 St. Nicholas Avenue apartment. Whitmire explains that this address became synonymous with artists, poets, writers, songwriters, intellectuals, and activists. The Sugar Hill apartment served as a sort of Renaissance USO, Whitmire writes, offering a couch, meal, sympathy, and proper introduction to wicked Harlem for newcomers on the Urban League approved list. This level of contact with New York society led Regina to meet her future husband, Bill Andrews, who was a promising young lawyer. Both of them were active in the community. Regina became involved with several organizations, including an African American sorority known as Delta Sigma Theta, where she served as president. She was also part of the Crisis Guild of Writers and Artists, a theater group which utilized her library as its meeting space. After moving up the ranks yet again and transferring to other libraries, she became the executive director of the Harlem Renaissance Theater. Despite her busy schedule, Regina was also a playwright. Whitmire explains that Regina's works were comprised of such common themes, including lynching and passing, black characters who pretended to be white, usually for financial benefits, and to live a more comfortable life. In 1936, a series of events led to Regina's promotion to the head of the 115th Street branch. Whitmire explains that she became the first African American to head a branch in NYPL history. Years later, Regina began a series of international flights to Germany, Portugal, Nigeria, India, Pakistan, Thailand, Liberia, Ghana, and Brazil. Organizations and people trusted Regina, and she had to take more time off from work to accommodate her extensive traveling. When she retired, Regina and her husband moved to their home in Lake Bohomac, New York, where she lived for 10 years following her husband's death. Regina died on February 5, 1993, at the age of 91. Whitmire uses books, journals, newspaper articles, interviews, and other sources to create a complete biography of Regina. An associate professor of library and information studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Whitmire produced an engaging and heavily researched account of an outstanding life. For this course, the most important aspect of the book was Regina's accomplishments in her workplace, which eventually led to her promotion to head librarian, a first in New York's history. What was also significant, and personally the most interesting, was her contributions outside of the workplace in her involvement in the Harlem Renaissance. The most important and most annoying sentence of the book, which was purposely inserted throughout the text, was the line, "To us, you're not an American, you're not white." I'd like to think that attitudes like this are a thing of the past, but we all know too well that this mindset still exists among many people, and therefore it is also the most frustrating sentence. Regina Anderson Andrews was an accomplished African American librarian with a wide range of abilities and interests, a figure who the reader quickly admires. What is unique about Regina's life is that she not only was involved with many organizations, but she was also the head of several of them. Whitmire depicts Regina as a person entirely unfazed by her surroundings, a woman who achieved great success during her long life. Regina's legacy is proof to those in power that her experiences and talents are what truly matter and were responsible for her advancement in the workplace and in the community. She was friends with the great minds of the day, traveled around the world, was a true leader and organizer, a wife, mother, playwright, and of course, a librarian who rarely wavered in her convictions. Whitmire concludes her portrait of Regina from this quote from Michael Marriott. About one thing she was empathetic. She says, "As I have gotten older, I'm glad to have been able to see things get better for the Negro. I'm impressed a great deal," she said in a firm voice, with feathery fringes of her ample white hair trembling as she spoke. "I'm very happy."